A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to films I'm willing to talk about again. So today, it's yet another Monday, and of course, it's August. So, there's going to be a number of new films that'll be coming to theaters pretty soon, so I'm more than excited about such hits out there. I'll probably have the chance to talk about Harold and the Purple Crayon and Alien Romulus, and I'll probably have other things down the line relating to newer films, so do be sure to stick around for those type of reviews. But for now, the business at hand calls for, believe it or not, another popular trilogy. Yep, if you can't tell by the title, How to Train Your Dragon is basically what we have in mind. So, for today, on Monday, we are going to be talking about the first How to Train Your Dragon film. Released in 2010, this was a DreamWorks film that not many people at the time thought was going to be a big hit. But surprise, surprise, it actually became a huge, huge masterpiece. It was certainly one of the biggest successes in DreamWorks, especially since 9 years had passed after Shrek had come out. And wouldn't you know that same summer, we also had Shrek Forever After. So it really made sense in the long run to eventually find some sort of successor to Shrek, and How to Train Your Dragon was certainly one of the best. And fun fact, when I first saw this in theaters, I was a bit conflicted because I really was dying to see Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which I have talked quite a bit about in the last season of films I'm willing to talk about again, alongside the sequel, Roderick Rules. So do be sure to check out those episodes. But of course, we ended up seeing How to Train Your Dragon instead, because they both came out around the same time in 2010. So we saw How to Train Your Dragon, and by the time I got out of theaters, age 11 I was at the time, I was unbelievably ecstatic about the whole thing. No doubt about it. And this can basically be for a number of different reasons. But first, I'm going to talk a bit about the movie itself. Mainly with the cast, first of all. The cast mostly consists of pretty well-known actors out there, including Jay Baruchel, America Ferrera, as well as Gerard Butler, which this is one of the few instances that I've recalled seeing Gerard Butler outside of many of those, apocalyptic films. He's mostly known for that kind of stuff, as well as the war films like the Fallen trilogy, like Olympus Has Fallen, which came 2 years after, as well as 2 sequels. But not to get off topic here, there of course were other actors involved with the whole thing as well, like Kristen Wiig, for instance. But of course the main thing is, the premise is that it's a town in the Nordic region of Berk, which of course is fictional, but it's an island that, unlike most other places, had a certain power for dragon taming. But yet, this would not be the case, at least until some time passes. Basically, the beginning certainly gives us a bit of a storyline, narrated by Baruchel himself, whom of course plays the main character, Hiccup, son of Stoic the Vast, a legendary Viking warrior of Berk itself. And he himself is accompanied by many other friends out there. And all these villagers of Berk want peacetime, but one thing that's constantly afflicted them over the years are dragons. Yep, these scaly invaders that come from an unknown origin are attacking the town of Berk itself and basically creating fear and chaos within the village itself. And to top it all off, you have Hiccup, who really wants to prove his worth to his father, Stoic the Vast, but yet he is not too confident about it, at least not for the moment. Hiccup is still relatively young for what he is. Basically, the son of one of the greatest Vikings in history, and you'd think by now he would actually be capable of doing something, which he basically is told to stay indoors, at least for the moment, while he goes out hunting. But eventually when Hiccup does make his way out to attempt to follow his father's footsteps, he actually does, believe it or not, manage to land a hit on the dragon, actually capturing one in a net, and it lands somewhere in the distance. He does get scolded by Stoic, but by the following morning, The town eventually does seem to find peace after that attack. Quite a ravenous way to put things together. Hiccup eventually decides to go find out where this dragon had landed that was caught in the net and whatnot. And when he does, it comes as a complete shock. Because after all, one night when he basically was studying an entire book full of dragons out there with species all over the place, like Gronkle, Zippleback, the Skrill, Monstrous Nightmare, and of course the legendary Night Fury, which is, as he describes, the unholy offspring of lightning and death itself. Never engage this dragon. Your only chance, hide and pray that it does not find you. So of course, he basically might be a bit oblivious to the concept that is clearly depicted within the book itself. But he still does, in fact, take up the bravery of the everlasting warrior within his heart. And he sets off into the woods alone and unaccompanied by anybody within Berk to find this dragon that he had hit with that net. And when he does, like I said, it turns out to be the Night Fury itself. Of all the dragons that he could have possibly hit with that net, it had to be the Night Fury. So wow. Hiccup eventually does take up the courage to free it. And when it does, it flies off. Not wanting to risk any further problems with his father, he decides to head back to Berk. But he at least feels proud of himself knowing that he had actually set off a rare dragon. It could possibly be going into the woods or maybe somewhere else. You never know. But of course, when time does eventually come and go, he eventually makes some revisits to those same woods that he was at earlier. And every time he does so, he actually happens to find some interesting things about this Night Fury. One thing about the Night Fury, though, that was off was apparently its tail. Apparently, one of the tail fins had sliced off, so he ended up creating a makeshift fin for the dragon to wear. He attached it to the tail when it was asleep, and well, like I've said, the time passes and all the new things come around. Studies take place between him and this dragon itself. Eventually the dragon does grow a certain bond to him, even going so far as to dance around him and draw on the grass with the stick, and even allowing Hiccup to place his hand on his muzzle. So that's definitely what you call a relationship. A bond that you never thought would ever take place. The son of one of the greatest Vikings to ever kill dragons, apparently having his own relationship with one of the most feared and deadliest dragons in history. Who would have thought that ever mixed so well together? I mean, it's the extremely rare and unlikely scenario that many would never think about. But apparently it happens. It happens within 45 minutes of the film itself. And that really goes to show just how impressive things can possibly be nowadays. With all the known possibilities that we could possibly stem out thanks to inspirations from other films, as well as creative thought that has been made possible by various ingenious men and women of all filmmaking history, it's just an impressive turnaround of events. I mean, look at DreamWorks' other films that they've made. Such other big masterpieces that they made after How to Train Your Dragon, like The Bad Guys. That one was really the next best thing to both Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon, because like I've said, How to Train Your Dragon got so big, it turned into such a hit franchise. But in any case though, the story does continue with some training, of course. A training to become a Viking, just like Stoic the Vast. And while Hiccup is somewhat conflicted by the whole thing, he basically agrees to the whole thing, even using his friends out there like Astrid, Fishlegs, Rough and Tough, and then of course there's Snotlout. All of these guys are basically descendants of well-known Vikings of Berk, and just like their ancestors, they do want to follow along in their footsteps to some degree, but of course they do require training, and well, that of course does allow for us to not only explore the bond between Hiccup and Toothless, but also his path on becoming a professional Viking. And while both events do seem to play off with a good amount of time spent, eventually you wouldn't believe. But Hiccup actually becomes so good at being a Viking, he actually irritates some of his friends, especially Astrid. I mean, there actually grows to a point where all Hiccup did was impress the Gronkle by rubbing its tummy, and Astrid becomes so infuriated that she goes off into the woods, believe it or not far from where Toothless was. So, yeah, that was the name that Hiccup came up with, because apparently the Night Fury did not have teeth, especially when he tried to feed him fish. Anyways, though, Astrid and Hiccup somehow meet up with each other, because apparently Hiccup was meant to become a Viking right then and there, just because he defeated the Gronkle with his wits and what he learned about his time with Toothless. So when Astrid eventually finds out what had happened and how Hiccup got so good at his training, she almost feels inclined to tell people about what was going on with him. Of course, Hiccup tries to object to the whole thing, and Toothless even gets involved too, scooping them both up and taking them on the ride of their life. I mean, just think about it. The flight training that went on with Toothless and Hiccup, especially when creating a proper harness as well as control over the tail fin and wings, that alone was an affair, especially when Hiccup ended up losing his cheat sheet. After all, a special pedal on the side of the saddle was meant to control the angulation of the tail fin that he created. But Hiccup, of course, trying to allow Toothless to fly smoothly, didn't go so well the first time. And in this case, though, they have an unexpected passenger aboard, whom certainly was terrified of the whole experience. But after she tries to make amends with him and resolve her own issues, all three of them agree it's probably best to not let this drag on any further. No pun intended. But the real trouble starts now. Apparently, one day of gladiator-style fighting goes down between the Vikings and the monstrous Nightmare. Yep, this was another dragon that was well feared by the locals of Berk, and even more so when you get to know that Hiccup didn't even know what to do against this species. But he still had to try. And well, when he couldn't find out just what to pretty much do against him, he started yelling so loud that it actually got Toothless's attention, and Toothless just goes right on into the arena and causing quite a panic. So, just as we suspect, the Night Fury, of course, has entered the town of Berk, causing the locals to fear for their lives, and some even flee. But of course, Toothless himself actually ends up getting captured and put into bondage aboard one of the ships, while Hiccup is basically sent back home along with Stoic. They both have a very heated argument with each other, and it becomes clear that Stoic has unfinished business. These same dragons that they have been trying to kill for years apparently just keep coming back, and it's mostly Hiccup's fault for causing all this. Even more so, Hiccup unintentionally allows Stoic to realize that there is apparently a secret island that these dragons are coming from. And Stoic eventually creates a conquest mission. He sends out the fleet of ships along with all the Viking warriors he has from Berk to go to this island that's out in the distance in quite a vicious fog. But of course, as you probably know, while Hiccup and the others, including Astrid and Snotlout, they all basically are left behind because they're still not trained Vikings, well worthy of this quest. But the real terror basically just jump starts right at this very point, from where the island basically not only has the dragons involved, but much to the Viking surprise, when Stoic and company land, apparently they have a queen. And this queen is gigantic, fierce, and utterly terrifying. to the point where they almost get overwhelmed. Their fleet of ships become badly damaged, so they can't quite make it back home. And most of the warriors themselves are certainly overrun by the majority of dragons, plus the queen herself, whom really has the power to take on the entire army of Vikings, all on her own even. And well, surprise, surprise, wouldn't you know that apparently Hiccup and the gang actually make their way back. They apparently were able to get the likes of such species out there like Monstrous Nightmare and the Gronkle, as well as another certain species of dragon out there. But amongst all things considered, they're all riding dragons together to fight another dragon. That really is an impressive turn of events. You know, having the dragons tamed and trained is one thing to serve you and wish by every command, but it's even more so when you realize the fact you have dragons attacking their own species. So like I said, we've definitely come a long way since it was nothing but dragons versus Vikings. But the business surrounding the fight against the dragons was not over yet, because this queen did not mess around, not even once. So what happened here? Well, simply put, Toothless gets rescued by Hiccup. They then make a plan to go after the queen after Stoic basically apologizes for what had happened, misunderstood and even misjudged Hiccup all these years, didn't realize his potential, not only becoming a warrior, but also becoming a tamer, a professional dragon tamer. So what we have here is an epic fight that takes place between the likes of Hiccup and Toothless versus the Dragon Queen. And this queen certainly has had a lot of abuse taken, but she certainly isn't over yet, because what they do here is formulate one final attack. The queen is prepared to fly, and Toothless and Hiccup are prepared to fire back at her. Once they do so, the queen falls back down to earth, landing with such a vicious explosion. And unfortunately, while Hiccup and Toothless try to escape the wake of the blast itself, Hiccup unfortunately ends up falling from the saddle deep well into the fire itself. And well, it seemed that he would be gone from the blaze itself, sacrificing his life to save the rest of his kind from Berk and possibly beyond. Also, having tamed a number of dragons, it seemed that peace would probably be restored, if not well resolved. But believe it or not, Hiccup actually survives the fire. But it does come at a cost, unfortunately. Upon recovery and waking up in bed, Hiccup realizes that he apparently had lost a leg and now has a prosthetic attached to him in the form of a spring-loaded artificial leg implant. And well, wouldn't you know that upon being greeted by the town of Berk and praised as a hero of the village itself, and then of course Toothless comes up and meets him, while once again throwing the others off guard for a moment. Thankfully though, they have once again managed to settle the differences between Vikings and dragons, and the town of Berk itself is safe once again. This time what seems to be for good, because not only do they have their finest warriors as well as their freshest new batch of Vikings in hand, they also have dragons. Not just any dragons, trained dragons. The almighty Night Fury being one of them. Hiccup and Toothless set off on some new adventures, and that is How to Train Your Dragon. Probably one of the greatest films we might have ever had in the history of the 2010s. And it sure was top 5 best films of 2010 as a whole, with some others including the likes of Due Date and Easy A. But all of that stuff are different stories for probably another day. Because after all, 2010 had boatloads of fresh new diamond, gold, and rainbow platinum, the likes of which you'd never think would exist until you actually saw them. So of course, my overall rating to How to Train Your Dragon Part 1 is a solid 9.2 out of 10.1. Surely a near perfect film for all that implies. And with 2 sequels on the line, that'll be a good thing for me to have for the rest of the week. So for Wednesday and Friday, I'm actually going to be talking about How to Train Your Dragon 2, as well as retell How to Train Your Dragon 3. As when I talked about it in films I should have talked about years ago, I wasn't too great at it. So I didn't really pay that much attention to it. So I'm going to take it more seriously and watch the movie once again to give you a much more clear and concise viewing of the third film. But 2 days from now, I'll have the second film up and running. So I'll see you guys again. Until then.
Whatever I want, I usually get. And I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.